And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. As always, he is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. Make sure you check us out on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod. We are there every single post-game live on the tube after the game, including this Sunday's big game on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Also subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts. Blue Horseshoe Podcast is where our midweek podcasts, Tuesday and Thursday, are dropped on that feed. George, a big one here for the Colts this week. Titans week coming up on the road at the 4-7 Titans, looking for the season sweep. But also, we are talking about, George, a 6-5 team currently right now holding the 7th and final playoff spot in the AFC. I want to throw some numbers by you here to back up a statement I'm going to say. I think at this point in the season, George, it's a disappointment. If we were talking at the end of the year about the Colts being outside of the playoffs looking in and not playing meaningful January football. Because, according to ESPN Analytics, the Colts right now have a 40% shot to make the playoffs, which is still right. If you do the quick math, that means they're saying it's less likely they get in than more likely. But the reason why my optimism is this high and the reason why I'm saying it's a disappointment if the Colts don't make the playoffs is the Colts have the easiest remaining schedule in the NFL. We've highlighted before that they play a lot of teams above and below them in this race for the 7th seed, so they control their own destiny. And outside of those games against the Steelers and against the Texans and against the Raiders and the Bengals, really 4 teams that are still alive and going for it, they have an easier schedule outside of those games as well that's very manageable starting this week in Tennessee. George, where do you fall on that? Again, 40% chance of going to ESPN Analytics, they make the playoffs, but also the easiest schedule remaining. Would you agree that right now it would be a disappointment if we're talking after week 18, the Colts not being in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're entering the final full month of the regular season with control in your own hands, which is what every team wants. I mean, you give all 32 teams at the beginning of training camp that offer. You can go into December and control your own playoff fate. They will all sign up for that. Every one of them. Even Philadelphia, it's 10-1 now, right now, would have signed up for just that fact that you knew you're going to control your own destiny going into December. So when you're in that situation, it would be disappointing. I compare it to like college basketball, where you know, hey, if you get a couple wins here at the end of the regular season and you make it at least into the second or third round of the conference tournament, you're going to clinch a bid no matter what expectations were coming into the year, no matter how big of a Cinderella team you are at that point. If you get to that point, it's going to be disappointing if you don't make it to the big dance. I think that's just the reality of sports and where the Colts are right now. I mean, they do have a division leader left on that schedule, but we'll get into that later. But on the road too. So I mean, that those are big time games. But in all honesty, you just highlight it. You got games against the Bengals. You got games against the Raiders. You got games against the Texans. You got games against Steelers that are essentially playoff games. I mean, they are all games that are going to have heavy impact on this tight race in the AFC. And you've got a game on Sunday in a place that, especially recently, has not been very friendly for you. And in a place that, for all the Titans' flaws, and we'll get into more of this later, they are undefeated at home this year. So it is a big game coming up. I think all 5 of those AFC games remaining are huge because of the tiebreaker implications. But if you don't come out of this, it's not like the season's a failure because we go back through and look at extra teams at the beginning of the year and all those kinds of things. But if you don't come out of this playoff berth, I think it's absolutely safe to say it'll be disappointing.
Without a doubt. And again, like you said, it's just like you look at it's very manageable with how the Colts are playing. It does kind of fall into their favor here. And it's just about taking care of business. And 2, like for this week as well, you get a break because not only we highlighted the Colts controlling their own destiny and the fact that, again, we just talked about the teams they play coming up are all teams either just above them or just below them in the playoff race. You win those games, you win all the tiebreakers, you are sitting very pretty to get one of those 7 playoff spots. But this week specifically, George, not only are you playing a 4-7 team in the Titans, again, on the road and they're undefeated at home, but a 4-7 Titans team that's in the middle of a rebuild, or I guess really maybe not even the middle of, entering a rebuild right now at the rest of their season. You also have, also in the 1 o'clock slate on Sunday, a big time game where it's not an elimination game, but one team right below you is going to get knocked down a peg because the Broncos and Texans are playing each other. Both teams are directly below the Colts. All three of those teams, though, are 6-5. Colts 6-5, Texans 6-5, Broncos 6-5. If you're the Colts and you win that game and you go to 7-5 on the season, one of those two teams is going to lose. And now one team hot on your tail, whether it's the Texans and having a really surprising and good year, or the Broncos, who are maybe the hottest team in the NFL, winning 5 in a row, one of those two teams are going to lose. And now all of a sudden you're going to be there separating space between the teams that are, or right now the teams below you that are chasing the Colts. And that's why this is a pivotal game here, because no matter who wins in Denver, Houston, you at least create a solid cushion going into the final 5 games of the season between you and at least one of the two teams that are hot on your tail. This is a big game here where, again, if you were the Colts, we talked about the magic number getting to 10, right? 10 wins. And going into the bye, we said they have to go 5-2 down the stretch to get to 10 wins. Now you went on Sunday or last Sunday against the Buccaneers. Now it's like, okay, you start doing the math. You got to go to the last 6 games, 4-2. You win this game against a bad Tennessee team, George. We're talking about the final 5 weeks of the season against the easiest schedule in the league, needing to go just 3-2. That's it. You could really do yourself massive favors here, George, by getting a win on Sunday in Tennessee.
It feels like every year that's the case. No matter where this schedule falls or where this game falls on the schedule, easy for me to say, it feels like it's always a big game with heavy implications, either in the division. It feels like every year they're either going in there with a chance to take over the division lead, or they're going in there with a chance to bolden their playoff hopes in some significant way. I don't know how the NFL manages that, but I guess kudos to them, because it probably is the biggest rivalry right now for the Colts on the schedule. I know the Titans are down and the Colts have not been, really a major factor, 3 of the last 4 years. But there's a proximity issue, the fact that Nashville and Indy are not very far apart. And just the fact that it just feels like every one of these games lately has been hugely important, hugely physical. And really, from a Tennessee standpoint, we'll get into this more on Thursday, but because the AFC is so tightened up, if they win, they have a faint heartbeat. They're not going to be right back in the mix. But at 5-7, you could start convincing yourself again. If you win out, you'll get to that magic 10-win number. And if you go 4-1 and you're 9-8, it may be unlikely, but a win would give you hope. A loss, and they're all but eliminated.
You're right. And so Tennessee has something to play for. And you're 100% right, too. A lot of big games are played specifically between the Colts Titans in Nashville. 2018, obviously that's the playoff berth on the line, week 17, right? I was going to have to do the quick math and make sure that was still not, or that was still a 16-game schedule, which it was. So week 17 with Andrew Luck winning on the road in Nashville, get to the playoffs. 2020, that game on Thursday night was later in the year. That was a nice cementing win for Philip Rivers and the Colts that helped, again, kind of get their playoff push going. Last year, we really saw the season come to an end after week 7 when they lost that game to Tennessee. And that was really the where the first changes were made with Matt Ryan getting benched, which, by the way, George, I don't know if this is a good or bad sign. Matt Ryan's on the call on Sunday.
He is.
Him, Andrew Catalon, Tiki Barber on the call, Colts Titans in Nashville. Matt Ryan going, I guess it's a house of horrors for him, going back to the place where he got benched last year for this specific matchup back in week number 7. I don't know if that's a good or bad sign for the Colts.
It's a really interesting sign. I'm kind of sad I'm going to be there now, just because I'm very interested to see what he's going to say. I don't often go back and watch the games after they're played, not on TV copy at least. But I might this time, just because that could be very interesting. What's he going to have to say about, first of all, he knows a good chunk of this roster still. The Colts did have a lot of turnover, but there are a lot of guys, obviously, who played with him last year. A lot of skill position guys in particular. Maybe most of his comments will just be, I wish they had that Downs kid when I was there.
Or some pass blocking. How about that too?
That would have helped. That has changed a lot. That's probably the biggest difference. We talked about that at the mid-season pod. You can go back, find that wherever you get your pods. Our mid-season breakdown, where we were grading the team and the offensive line, and they showed it again on Sunday against Tampa Bay. Probably the biggest improvement this year, their ability to open some holes against that run defense. And I still say, I said it then, I wrote about it yesterday. I still say Pittman's game had a lot to do with Taylor's game. When they got Michael Pittman going early and they made the Bucks play a little more honest defensively, it opened things up. Jonathan Taylor had a huge game. All that being said, job Wesley French did on Vita Vea, that might be like the gold star of the season. You give gold stars for performances, that might be the gold star of the season so far.
You're right about that. Again, we did not give Wesley French enough credit there on Sunday in the postgame pod. You're 100% right. He made Vita Vea, for the most part, invisible. And that was a matchup that we were afraid of, that we thought was going to really change the outcome of the game. And Jonathan Taylor, 15 carries, 91 yards. Zach Moss did a great job as well in his limited role, carrying the rock. Colts ran the ball very effectively against one of the stoutest run defenses in the league. And George, that also now, as we go into December here, that is also a major point to bring up, because what was viewed as, not that the entire thing was a positive, that's not what we're going to say, but now you look back in hindsight, with Jonathan Taylor being put on PUP, missing the first 4 games, easing his way back, now getting the contract extension and good spirits and motivated. You look back on really him missing the first, let's say, 5 weeks, because his time was limited in that first matchup against Tennessee, missing the first 5 weeks. This is now, George, a guy that Jonathan Taylor is not your normal running back going into week 13. He's got a lot of juice left in those legs.
He absolutely does. And you saw it on Sunday. I mean, there were some real vintage Jonathan Taylor runs, breaking tackles, moving the pile. But he had that burst. And a lot of times when you get into week 13, week 14, week 15, week 16, it's tough for running backs. I mean, there's a reason that position, it burns out so quickly in the league. You know, it is really hard to be a running back in the NFL. And I think he's in a really unique situation. And so is Zach Moss, for that matter, because Moss played the first month, but they have been able to split carries. They haven't had to take the full load, either one of them. And I think both of them are probably fresher than they would be normally at this point in the year, which is obviously, I don't think it takes much, knowledge of football at all to know that's the key to this team going forward. If they can run the ball effectively, that's the difference. The Colts wouldn't come out and say it, but that's the difference this week and in 2 games before the bye that they won as far as the offensive performance. The running game got going, and all of a sudden the offense plays at a better tempo. They're moving the chains. They're putting points on the board. That's no coincidence. If they can run the ball well these last 6 games, I keep wanting to say 7, like the Tampa game didn't happen. If they can run the ball well these last 6 games, then I think that's the most important element to me going down the stretch. And we were just looking before we started recording at these defenses that they're going to face. Most of them are in the middle of the pack or lower as far as run defense goes. There's a couple that stand out. Houston at the end of the year will be interesting, but as unlikely as it may be, if you can win these next 5, the Houston game won't matter.
You're right about that. Boy, wow. Let's get nuts here, George. Let's go for the number 1 seed, damn it. Let's just go on a big time tear here.
All the way to the top.
And start playing for that number 1 seed in the AFC. But that's also, too, I think, a major reason why you should feel confident right now going into this final 6-game stretches. You have your best offensive player now fresh and really hitting his stride, where most other players are starting to hit a wall or wear down physically because it is such a grueling position. Jonathan Taylor missing the first month and a half of the season is now beneficial for the Colts more than you would think. And during the early part of the season, when we're sitting there stressing out about contract and injury and them feuding, now looking back, that is a benefit for this team now going into the home stretch as we enter December. You look at, like you just mentioned before, teams that are, for the most part, weaker against the run on for a good amount of teams are going to face. So that should be an area you can exploit and have balance to an offense. And I think that was one of the biggest reasons why Gardner Minshew, despite some turbulent times, especially in the second quarter there, never truly kind of fell off and really hurt this team, was because when the Colts need to lean on the run game, they were able to do so. And that took pressure off of Gardner Minshew. And then he was able to pick his spots, make some big time throws, and not have, not feel like the weight of the offense was on his shoulders. And so we have seen now when the Colts need to run the ball, they can do so. And like I said, not just Jonathan Taylor, but Zach Moss as well, with how these two have bounced off each other and shared the load. You have two fresh running backs going into December and going against weaker rush defenses. That is should on paper, at least, George, give your offense such a big advantage now going into each of these games that we should see a lot more what we saw on Sunday against the Buccaneers.
Absolutely. And I think together they had something like 25, 26 carries for 146 yards. And neither one of them had a massive day alone. And Taylor ended up with 15 for 91, and then it was 10 or 11 for 55 for Moss. But you put them together, that's a heck of a day for a running back. And I think that's when you're going forward, that's what you want to see. Both of them, they have a little bit different styles. Obviously, Moss is more the hammer in this regard. Not that Taylor can't do that, but he's more the speed guy. And I think it just keeps defenses honest a little bit. And it's one of the many things that you really sit there and think, man, if they bring these two back and they play next year with Anthony Richardson, I mean, you always try to imagine what they're doing and put Anthony Richardson into this offense. That run game with the two of them and Anthony Richardson could really be something to watch. But as it pertains to these next 6 highly important games this season, I think what you just said is dead on. It allows Gardner Minshew to do more of what he does best. You're not putting the game on his shoulders. You're able to give him quicker throws, faster reads. I'm sure he's seeing better passing windows when the run game's working like this. That, I think, is the biggest thing moving forward. That stretch there in the second quarter, I think it was the second quarter, where he threw the interception, and then Alec Pierce made a terrific breakup of another interception. You started to wonder, like, is this going to go the wrong way? Is this going to become, the Saints or the Browns game all over again? They're going to turn the ball over multiple times, and they're going to cost themselves a win. And I do think the run game being able to be as effective as it was a big reason that didn't happen. And I think you're going to see that going forward. As far as Pierce goes, it was interesting yesterday. Shane Steichen said that Jim Bob Cooter kind of picks out one area every week that something that's happened around the league that's maybe an unusual situation, and the offense works on it. And last week it just happened to be, defending interceptions, like trying to make sure that your guy doesn't make the catch. Pierce obviously gets an A+ for that class.
And unfortunately, that should be one where the Colts practice it every week, not just like once a month or once a season. That should be a Friday staple or a Saturday staple here. All right, guys, let's get into it. Let's practice some PBUs here, because Gardner is usually good for 1 or 2 passes a game that you're like, oh. And thankfully in Pierce's case, that pass breakup really could have saved the game. And like I said, one small play, but a huge, huge impact on the outcome of the game. Just to quickly go back, one last thing about the run game, George. 2 things. Number one, look at the stats. Jonathan Taylor, 6 yards a carry. Let's just round up 1/10 of a yard. Zach Moss, 7 yards a carry. So both did not get a ton of carries, 23 combined. But when they were asked to run the ball, they ran it effectively, which is huge because, again, I think you want a little bit more balance. You had 41 pass attempts for Gardner Minshew, 27 rush attempts as a team total. I think you want to come closer to that balance. But I think also part of it was the Buccaneers have one of the worst pass defenses. So you're going to try to pick on that. I think that was a little bit more matchup specific as to why the skew was heavy pass and less run. I think we'll see more of a 50-50 split here against Tennessee and other teams going forward here. But also, too, George, I think important was when the Colts had to run the ball, they did. Like, we've seen this team, right, be unable at different points in different years, be unable to put teams away. And we saw, especially on Sunday, after you get the strip sack of Baker Mayfield, Buccaneers still had 3 timeouts. So it wasn't like a situation where it's like, oh boy, like the game's over. We take a few knees, we're done. Colts had to still win the game Jonathan Taylor, what they do, run the ball, get the first down, game over. Like they were able to not only run the ball effectively in limited sample size, but also too, when they needed to run the ball and everyone knew, hey, this team was going to run it. Buccaneers have a good run defense. They ran the ball, figured it out, got a first down, and iced the game away. That is huge. We're talking about, going down the stretch here in December. It's not only about like, oh, you have winnable games here, but we've seen in the NFL, George, plenty of times. How do you win games, and how, more importantly, do you not lose games? And we've seen a lot of teams lose games. And one of the ways you don't lose games, as simple as it sounds, is by taking care of business and not giving the opponent extra opportunities. And that part of that is when you have the ball, 4 minutes left, how do can you run the ball 10 times in a row to ice the clock? You got to feel confident the Colts going forward here with 2 fresh running backs and a really good offensive line should be able to do that in a lot of these matchups here remaining in the season.
You know what? That last one, you're talking about running the ball there at the end. That last one almost went to the house. I mean, Taylor went down, which is the right thing to do, and just end the game there. But they might have been able to score on that one if that was the goal.
Most people say, or a lot of people say, like one of the most exciting plays in football is like a kickoff return for a touchdown. Like when you see the hole and they just hit it, and then all of a sudden there's just running free. I would argue one of the most exciting plays in football, George, is Quentin Nelson out on the edge, running as a lead blocker. When you just say, oh boy, and you just watch the defenders peel away, dive down, duck out of the way. Seeing Quentin Nelson running downhill on a lead block in open field, I would say it's one of the most exciting plays in football. That was a tremendous sight to see.
I've said it before. I think he's the only offensive lineman in the league with his own highlight reel, and that's part of why. I mean, you see these plays, and it's absolutely. I don't think it's very exciting if you're on that train track. If you're
Agreed.
in the way,
Agreed.
It's probably not as exciting. But watching it, yeah, there's no doubt. And I think since he got drafted here, those are probably the biggest plays. When you see him get around the edge and get that head of steam, and there's a running back behind him, and it's usually Jonathan Taylor. It's a very, very scary sight. I think it's probably one of the most exciting sights you can see with this offense. And again, next year, what if that's Anthony Richardson running behind him a couple of times? It's going to be, there's so much reason for optimism. I think that's one thing we're talking about. That's why I say even if they don't make the playoffs, it'll be disappointing, but it won't be like the season was a failure. What Shane Steichen has done this year, the fact that Gus Bradley, since the New Orleans game, has made some really important adjustments on defense, and they've got guys coming back. That's the other thing about when you look at this stretch. Tennessee, they're definitely not going to have Grover Stewart. We'll see about Juju Brents. I'll go ahead and give you the spoiler of Shane Steichen's answer when we ask him on Wednesday. We'll see. But then moving forward into Cincinnati and beyond, you get those 2 back on a defense that's playing a lot better than it was during that 3-game losing streak. There's a lot of reasons for hope, not just now, but for 2024.
You're 100% right about that. Right. It's the Colts are in, for this specific season, the best case scenario, because if they make the playoffs, it's awesome. What a great year. No one saw this coming. If they miss the playoffs, right, it's not a failure. It's not the world is ending, because no one even thought that we're talking about, George, meaningful football games here going into December. But Shane Steichen, I think in part, has done a tremendous job with a backup quarterback for 95% of the season. And that's why I think George right now, like still a long way to go, 6 weeks, right, left in the season. But right now, at least as we head into December, I think Shane Steichen is your front runner for coach of the year. Like you look around the league, there has been no coach that has done more with a roster that Steichen has than Shane himself.
I mean, with Josh McDaniels fired, I would agree with you. I mean, when he's out there, he's no, but I mean, when you think about it, the 2 top contenders are probably in this division.
Yes.
In all honesty. And the reason I would give Steichens the nod over Ryan's is I'm a homer. No, it's because the quarterback situation. Yeah, CJ Stroud's a rookie, but he's also playing, arguably the best quarterback right now in the league at the level that he's been at. He's in that conversation. And Ryan's has had him week in and week out. And D'Amico's done a great job with that defense, which we expected. I mean, like everybody knew that was going to go coming in. And he deserves a ton of credit. And I think he's right there. I think they're 1 and 1A. But you've got to break that tie somehow between them. And for me right now, that tiebreaker is D'Amico Ryans is doing it with CJ Stroud. and Shane Steichen is doing it with Gardner Minshew.
You're right. And this is subject to change, right? Based on what happens in week 18. And I don't think you're going to give the award based on one game, but Steichen is 1-0 against Ryans. And like you said, too, doing it. And right now the Colts are in a playoff spot. The Texans are not, although same record. And then again, they're right there. Colts 7th spot, Texans 8th spot. But it is like I'm with you. Like it's one of those where Steichen, it's close. Steichen and DeMeco Ryans, I think, are 1-2 right now in coach of the year, in that coach of the year race. But Shane Steichen, for what he's doing with a backup quarterback for all but one game is insane. Is insane on top of, again, the Texans were a mess as well. So it's not like, he came to a stable organization. But even since Shane Steichen's been there with the entire Jonathan Taylor saga, that was kind of a dark cloud hanging over the franchise all off season. That's another thing too, that you have to, wade through, have to figure out. He's done a tremendous job. And so Stroud, like Ryans absolutely should get credit for the hiring of Bobby Slowick as offensive coordinator and having him along with Stroud develop into where they are. I mean, Stroud is right. He's one of the 3 best quarterbacks, right? Probably this season so far. But with that said, I think Shane doing more with less is the reason why he should be the front runner for coach of the year. And again, I think we even saw it on Sunday, George. He's been creative all season long. He's put Gardner Minshew in position to succeed. And even when then Gardner Minshew's tail spinning, has figured ways to get him out of that. He's been very creative. He's been aggressive. Like he's done everything possible to put this team right now in a 6-5 spot. And I don't think, maybe outside of one game, a little bit with clock management, and play calling decisions, let's say against the Browns late before the half. Like there are certain spots you could absolutely get on Shane Steichen for abandoning the run, giving Jonathan Taylor, I think it was the Browns game or maybe the Saints game that they kind of blend together. One carry in the second half. I think it was the Browns game. Like there were definitely spots where you could say, oh, he's been bad or he blew this. But for the most part, George, we're talking about, out of 100, 90% positive from Shane Steichen so far in year number 1 as a rookie head coach, by the way. Very impressive.
Yeah, I think where they're at right now feels like, and you said it just a little bit ago, best case scenario for this team. Where they're at right now with everything they've been through, it's hard to imagine them being much better. And let's not forget, they should be 7-4. There is some controversy on one of these 5 losses. So it's a really good run. They've overcome so much. And you go back, you mentioned the Jonathan Taylor thing and how that was a cloud on really the entire training camp, which is kind of an important part of the year, by the way, when you're out there in training camp. You lost your rookie quarterback in week 5, week 6. It was really early. One of your best defensive players, one of your top defensive linemen is out for 6 games. So there's 1 game left on that. And the secondary has been hit really hard by injuries and suspensions. They've had constantly guys, whether it's Dallas Flowers, whether it's all the way back to Isaiah Rodgers. Like it's all the things that happened. Juju Brent's being in and out. Even this week alone, Shaq Leonard gets cut on Tuesday, and I talked about in the postgame pod, the locker room was pretty somber. Even on Wednesday, you could feel the sense of loss in there. And even on Sunday night after the game, Zaire Franklin was saying it didn't feel right. Obviously he was happy. They were all very excited and they were going nuts. But he felt his friend not being there. A guy that's been beside him his entire career. And they overcome that. Those are the kind of things that doesn't happen everywhere in the NFL. It hasn't happened here in the past. How many times have we done just in our short time together a post-game pod where it's like, well, this was hanging over them, whatever, and they couldn't overcome it. And that not very often at all this year where we've said, well, Shane just couldn't figure that out.
And even last week too, George, you have Jim Irsay's interview with Real Sports, and then he's tweeting up a firestorm. So that's like, we're talking about legitimately 10 different instances, right, of where he as a head coach had to face adversity, whether it had to do with players, had to do with an owner, had to do with injuries, had to do with who's there, who's not there, a gambling suspension that in terms of what he was accused of betting on games, he was, betting on the Colts. We've never seen a player suspended while he was on the field or or I should say, in trouble for betting on games when he was playing in the game for. So it's like you look at that adversity Shane Steichen had to face and overcome. Not that D'Amico Ryans hasn't faced adversity in Houston. I mean, that offensive line, we talked about it when they played back in week number 2. They've been ravaged by injuries on the offensive line. But really, outside of that, George, there's been not a ton of adversity D'Amico Ryans has had to face so far in year number 1, which, look, good for him. I don't think you're signing up and volunteering to have all these distractions thrown at you almost weekly, it feels like. But also, I mean, look, it's maybe not a big time distraction, but you also go to Germany and you play a game in a different environment, have kind of things, be all out of whack as well. He's, I would say, 10 different circumstances that have been thrown in the face of Shane Steichen since he's taken over as head coach, that he has had to navigate through. And I would say, for the most part, maneuvered through them as good as you can. So that also just highlights, again, and adds to the surprise of the Colts being here at 6-5 and holding a playoff spot going into December. When you just forget about the roster talent and not having your quarterback, all the other distractions that we have seen take down teams and lead to bad losses, like they have, through 11 games, George, they have never one time this season looked distracted, looked disinterested, looked like they didn't care, looked like they were unfocused or undisciplined. No matter what has happened, their focus each and every week has been on the field. And that's, again, a massive credit to coaching directly for Shane Steichen of sending a message and not allowing outside influences to impact this team's readiness when it comes to playing games on Sunday.
Absolutely. I think it was Tyquan Lewis yesterday on the conference call with the media who said, this is a guy who can lead you to the promised land. I mean, that's the way these players look at him. And I think that's the reason he's been able to overcome all these things, is that locker room almost from day one bought in completely. And I think that's a testament to his leadership ability. But they completely think this is the right guy at the right time, and they play like it. You see it on the field. Again, they should be 7-4. Even at 6-5, it's above where they've exceeded both of our win total from the preseason already.
Oh, yeah.
They're already past that. And theoretically, they're not done. If they are, then the coach of the year talk is out the window if they're going to stop at 6 wins. But I don't think that's going to happen. But I think the most important thing for this team, every week, win or lose, you've seen that fight. Even when they were down 30-6 in Jacksonville, they were still fighting. They were still trying to make plays. Not once this year have I seen this team quit on the coach, quit on each other. That's a testament to, because it was a locker room that was, a little bit in chaos when Shane Steichen got here. And we talked about the circus was down. It was a real bad situation at the end of last year. Anyone who watched Colts last year doesn't need to rehash that. They understand. But none of that has been evident from week 1, really, with Shane Steichen in charge.
And even too, like you look at like keeping these guys engaged and focused. Like you go back, that big win over Tennessee, right? You go to 3-2, you finally beat the Titans for the first time in 5 games. But also that game, Richardson hurts his shoulder. We find out later he's out for the year. And then you look at, like I said, then you follow that up with getting shellacked in Jacksonville. Your defense gets toasted 2 weeks in a row against the Browns and the Saints, both offenses struggling coming into that game. You're there at 3-5 on a 3-game losing streak without your starting quarterback in for the rest of the season. It's easy to quit, George. It's easy for these players to say, you know what? Which, by the way, a lot of them, like you mentioned, are there from last year. So a lot of them have the scars from last year, know what it's like to be in a free fall. Easy for them to pack up and say, you know what? Okay, we got a guy we like in Shane Steichen. We got a rookie quarterback, but he's not in here. Gardner Minshew's there, but, we had a nice first half of the year. But, all right, 3-5, 3-game losing streak. It was a good year. Let's just kind of get ready here and have one eye on 2024. They have rallied. And again, have found different ways to win in Carolina against the Patriots, now against the Bucs. And like you said, he really has revived this ship when it easily at 3-5 on a 3-game losing streak easily could have sunk.
That's what I was writing about at that time. I mean, I think back to, that 3-5 stretch and writing about they've got to avoid this becoming a replay of last season where you just couldn't pull out of the tailspin and it just got worse every week until you finally finished 4-12-1. And then there was, at the time that the season ended, the only real bright spot was that they had the number 4 overall pick. That was it. Every other thing going on with this franchise was, in a real place of darkness because you felt like there's not a quarterback that you can count on. You don't have any future there. You didn't have any idea who the head coach was going to be. There was no path forward there. And they were coming off one of probably the most disastrous seasons definitely I've been a part of, but that I can remember in the NFL in terms of having a team that legitimately came into the year thinking they could make a deep run in the playoffs and then going 4-12-1 and, all the insanity that happened. The November 7th press conference alone, it was just, and you think about where that team was at that point. We can do this a lot down the stretch, a year ago today, where they were at. And the difference now, I think they were getting ready for the Dallas game last year at this point. And you know how that went. But you think about the difference between the feeling going into that one and the feeling now of, hey, this could be a playoff team. And there's 40% chance. This is one thing I wanted to ask you. I forgot we got on to other topics. So they got a 40% chance to make the playoffs. How does that rate to is it the highest of the teams in contention right now for that 7th seed?
That's a good question. I do not know. Let me see if I can find that very fast here. That's a great question I should have had prepared, and I do not. So let me see here if I can. I'm going to try to stall here for a little bit, but that, I mean, looking at it right now, and you do the quick math with the Texans at 6-5, the Broncos at 6-5 alone, people are still believing in the Bills as well. Like, I'm assuming that out of 40%, the Colts are the highest because of the easiest schedule remaining, because they play teams, again, that are right above them, right below them as well. I mean, you also get I know they're not been a good home team. I get that. So it's not like it's a big advantage, but the Steelers are at home. The Texans game in week 18 is at home. So a lot of these big games too you have coming up here are in Lucas Oil Stadium, a place that you haven't played well, but at least you're on a 1-game winning streak. It's small, but hey, look, everything counts here, George. You got to start somewhere. You are, again, like, at least have that advantage where that should be now in their favor going into now these final 6 weeks.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing of it is the home road split is split right now. You've got 3 road games, 3 home games remaining. But after these next 2 weeks, you're playing 3 or Final Four at home, which I think is a big advantage, especially with fresh legs. Now they've got to prove that they can win at home, and we've seen that be a problem. But hey, you win those last 3, you're going to have a winning home record this year, and that would be a big accomplishment for this football team.
Okay, so we have some numbers here. According to ESPN, this is their analytics. So they right now have the Colts with a 44% chance to make the playoffs. That is actually the 8th highest odds just to make the playoffs. Teams with higher odds to make the playoffs according to ESPN analytics. Chiefs, obviously. Ravens, Dolphins, Jaguars. Those 4 teams right now are your division leaders. And then for the wild card, just to make the playoffs, Steelers, 74% chance to make the playoffs. Browns, 68% chance to make the playoffs. Texans, 53% chance to make the playoffs. Colts at 44%, Broncos at 29%. So right now, ESPN, according to their math, has the Texans as a more likely team to make the playoffs compared to the Colts.
So that's what I was wondering. Like, where does that run? Where does that fit in? And it makes sense. The Texans have a pretty easy schedule left too. I mean, they've got Tennessee twice coming up, which is pretty good for them. And they've got the Colts, which it's on the road, but they've got a pretty unencumbered schedule, with the exception of that big one coming up on this week against Denver, which I think is really interesting, as you're pointing out, because one of them's going to lose. But I also think it puts some pressure on the Colts to win, because they know going into this game in Tennessee, if you lose on Sunday, you will lose that 7 spot, because either Houston or Denver will pass you.
This is, now I'll be honest, I didn't go to school for math here, and I don't think many people in media did go to school for math. So help me out here,
So
George. Hopefully you're better at
why
math
we
than I
got into
am.
sports writing, right? And
That's
sports broadcasting. So we don't have to do math.
That is right. Or so we thought, but here we are
Right.
crunching numbers here. So the percentages I just gave you were just to flat out make the playoffs. Just you're one of the 7 teams. Now they also have percentages, ESPN does here, George, of what seed you're most likely to get. And so if you look at, right, the Colts are not winning the division. So the first 4 seeds, let's just push away here. 5, 6, and 7 in the AFC. They have right now as the Browns the most likely to get the 5 seed at 25%. And the Steelers have the highest percent chance to get both the 6 and 7 seed. Now, what's interesting is they have the Texans with a 17% chance to get the 5 seed, higher than the Colts. A 16% chance for Houston to get the 6 seed, higher than the Colts. They have the Colts, though, with a 16% chance to get the 7 seed, which is higher than the Texans. Now, again, I don't know how that math, I guess if you add the percentages up, that's how you get the Texans more likely to make the playoffs than the Colts. But at least right now, they are saying ESPN is the Colts are more likely to get the 7 seed at 60% versus 50% chance for the Texans here. I hope I'm confusing myself, and I'm probably confusing the audience as well. So maybe we should have just left these numbers off to the side. And so here's the easy way to boil it down here, George. Take care of business. All right. Beat the Texans at home week 18. And you got nothing. The math is going to math itself. The math is going to work in your favor. You take care of business. You beat a 4-7 Tennessee team, which you should on the road here coming up on Sunday. You beat the Steelers at home, which you should in a few weeks from now. You beat the Bengals on the road with Jake Browning at quarterback, which you should. And then you go home and beat the Texans week 18. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. Forget the math. It's going to work in your favor if you win those games, George. Let's go.
To me, the most important math right now is 4 more wins. Because I think we're all in agreement that if you get to 10, you're in. So win 4 more games. Doesn't matter where they come, win 4 more games and you get in. Now, what I want to know about that math is, does Pittsburgh have to play twice? Like if they're both the 6 and the 7 seed, how does that work for them? Do they have to play one game and then come back and play the other?
Kenny Pickett versus Mitch Trubisky. It's going to be a black and gold scrimmage there at Heinz Field. Or I guess Acrisure Stadium now. Excuse me. Get the sponsorship right.
Yeah.
That would be fun. That would be a hot take here, George. That would be a playoff first.
That would be pretty exciting. The AFC Championship games, the Steelers against the Steelers.
Now, you want to talk about big math here. The Colts have a 11% chance to get the 5 seed.
Ooh. The 5 seed would be... I see about the AFC right now too. Who knows how this is going to shake out? Because Cleveland and Pittsburgh right now are, as those numbers show, the front runners, for the 5 seed, and they're the 2 teams ahead of the Colts right now in the playoff picture where where the seeds are at. But neither one of them is in a real comfortable spot. I mean, you've got Pittsburgh offense scored 16 points and it was cause for celebration, which I think tells you a lot right there. And Cleveland, who knows who their quarterback is going to be from week to week right now. I mean, that's a real mess right now for them. I'm not saying both teams have overcome that, obviously, for the most part of the year. They're 7-4. They've had these problems for the majority of the season. They deserve a lot of credit. I think you could put Kevin Stefanski in the coach of the year talk, honestly, given everything that the Browns have been through as well. But it's not like in years past where you feel like, oh, there's a team out there that's just severely underperformed. Like if Cincinnati still had Joe Burrow, they would be in this general 5-7 range still, but you would feel like that's not a 5, 6, 7 seed. That's a team that could possibly win the AFC. Buffalo should be that team, but their schedule is so difficult. And you see, like losing that game in Philadelphia was killer for them because now they go to Kansas City and you just got a week after week after week with them. I just don't think that team's out there. In years past, there's always been that like underperforming team that you feel like, okay, they're in. I think if you look at all those teams right now, from 5 to maybe 9 or 10, you could legitimately see any one of them making the playoffs.
You're 100% right. And that's why, too, like you got it. And that's why I think going back to it, George, like if the Colts are on the outside looking into the Sorry, got excited there. and knock me out. But what I was going to say is like, that's why I think going back to how we started this podcast, like, I think it's still a disappointment if the Colts don't make the playoffs because, like I said, the teams right above them in Pittsburgh and Cleveland right now, holders of the 5 and 6 spot currently. Like you said, you lost to Cleveland. You lost that tiebreaker. We could have Joe Flacco starting for the Browns the rest of the season, or some combination of Dorian Thompson-Robinson and PJ Walker. And that's one where you're going to have 3 quarterbacks potentially playing for Cleveland. Even with their elite defense and elite run game, it's not a lock or it's something you feel comfortable with if you're Cleveland. Oh, this is a guarantee to make the playoffs. And like I said before, you would have thought with how people reacted to the Steelers beating the Bengals, that the Steelers put up 70 points against Cincinnati and their offense, all they did was go up and down the field and score touchdowns. They got over 400 yards of total offense for the first time in 3 years. Congratulations. I think it's like 59 games exactly, which is unbelievably bad. They scored 16 points. So for all that offense, all them moving up and down the field, they scored 1 offensive touchdown. So again, new offense, no Matt Canada, but you still are kicking field goals most of the game. So if you're the Colts, again, as long as you don't give them opportunities, which that's the only reason why they're 7-4, is because teams constantly turn the ball over, especially deep in their own end. How many Steeler interceptions I've seen in the end zone or in the red zone is mind-boggling. Jake Browning was driving down the field to start the opening possession of the third quarter back when these Bengals, I think, were still winning 7-3 at that point, throws an interception at like the 15-yard line. Which again, I know it's a tough task or a tough ask here because Minshew we've seen him been prone to turnovers here at inopportune times. If you don't turn the ball over against the Steelers, that offense, especially with how well, by the way, the Colts defense has turned around the last few weeks, that offense doesn't scare you. It does not scare you whatsoever. And so the math right now, let's say, does not favor the Colts. The schedule does, and how they are playing absolutely does, George. Come on.
And I feel like you could honestly take those 5 teams from like 5 to 10 and put them in a bag and draw out names and have as good a chance of predicting the finish as anything. It's going to be a really chaotic final 6 weeks here, which I think is a lot of fun. I mean, I think that's what the NFL wants. The divisions don't feel as up for grabs, especially with Houston losing to Jacksonville on Sunday. I think those 4 division champs are all in pretty good. They're all sitting pretty right now. Maybe Baltimore has a little bit of pressure on them, but again, with the problems that Cleveland and Pittsburgh have had, it's hard to really feel that right now. Mathematically, that one's still really, really close, and we'll see. It could turn that way. Tomlin probably deserves to be in the Coach of the Year conversation as well, as far as that goes. But those 5 teams beneath it just you feel like any one of them. Cleveland, Pittsburgh are 7-4 right now. It wouldn't shock you if they finish 13-4, and it wouldn't shock you if they finish, 7-10. Like it doesn't. None of that would be shocking. Every team you could do that with. Denver could be 12-5. Denver could be 6-11, and it's the same. It's just I can't remember a year like this, and I think that's why the Colts are in good shape, because as you're trying to navigate this crazy finish, you've got a lot of teams with losing records. Even the division champ left that you play, Atlanta, has a losing record. You've got lots of teams that, as we mentioned throughout the pod, have key tiebreaker situations with you. Teams right above you, teams right below you. You've got lots of home games. I think those are all things when it's unpredictable out there and you have no idea how things are going to turn out. Those all feel like really big advantages for Indianapolis.
Absolutely. And that's why, again, I think to put a bow on this podcast to kind of finish where we started, is like it's right there for the Colts for the taking. So far, again, this stretch we have seen in November, and Shane Steichen pointed out in his post-game press conference, or I think in the locker room, I should say, I think he's right about this, 3-0 in November. And so that's a mark of a good team now, where I really do think, George, when the calendar flips past Thanksgiving, this is really where you see the contenders and pretenders separate. It's all bunched, it's all muddled right now. But the teams that really hit their stride and play their best football are the ones that pull away and make a playoff spot. I know it's an obvious statement, but you got to feel pretty good that the Colts are right now trending towards playing their best football. We've seen them in years past go down, right? Kind of struggle, limp to the finish, and not finish the job. there's absolutely reason right now to feel confident with the playoff picture muddled from 5 to, let's say, like you said, 11. It's all one big jumbled mess, one big puzzle. What 3 teams are going to come out of it? Maybe you should do that for Thursday. Maybe we'll put like 6 teams in a hat here and do some blue horseshoe unofficial predictions here. See who's making the playoffs, because I think you're right. I bet you if we put 6 names in a hat, pull out 3, bet you those 3 names or those 3 teams are going to hit, just with how unpredictable it's been. But it does, like, this is, again, if you are right now the Colts, you got to feel good about where this team is trending towards going forward here, where they feel like maybe not peaking, but they are playing better football and really hitting their stride and rounding into form, versus feel like the gas is running on empty and they're just kind of limping to the finish.
And this is why, we weren't positive after those 2 wins right before the bye, but we kept saying, hey, survive in advance. They're ugly wins, but the ugly wins are better than ugly losses. And it's why those games were so important. Yeah, they were not well-played games, and you're not getting any aesthetic points for them, but it puts them in this position. They were able to go through the bye week, get a little bit healthier. We were talking about that being a key. That happened. They obviously looked fresh on Sunday. There's still a couple more guys that could get back, as we mentioned. And I think the great thing is the rest of the year, you don't care about style points. If they beat Tennessee 3-0, that's fine. It does not matter the rest of the way. Just win, baby. The old Al Davis motto, just win, baby.
It ain't college football. There's no committee there judging how you win. Just win. Let's go, George. Come on. I'm fired up for Thursday's pod. Oh, let me tell you. Titans week. Big chance here to take a stranglehold of that at least bare minimum 7th playoff spot here as well, and really kind of keep the train moving in the right direction. So again, this is the time. If you haven't already, subscribe, because let me tell you, there's some meaningful games here to be played and a lot of analysis to be given between now and week 18. Subscribe on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Podcast. Subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts under that same name, Blue Horseshoe Podcast, bright blue logo. That is our feed where each of our pods are uploaded twice a week during the week, each and every Tuesday, each and every Thursday. So check it out. Thursday is going to be a fun one. We get you set for Colts Titans. You mentioned before, George, Titans undefeated at home. You look at the numbers, they are a way different home team than they are road team. So it's going to be tough. Titans fans, they love being the Colts. They're going to try to play spoiler here. And like you said, get themselves back into that playoff discussion. If they can get a win and go to 5-7, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a spirited one. Matt Ryan is back in the house of horrors, I guess, for him, where the last game that, well, I mean, I know he restarted again later in the year, but really that's where the season went south last season. So he is now opening that wound again. So it's going to be a good game. That is for sure. It's going to be a very interesting one. So we will be back on Thursday. Get your set. Everything you need to know for Colts Titans. You can find it in one spot right here, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Have a great week. We'll talk to you on Thursday on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.